Last evening, the Finance Ministry had set up an expert panel headed by former CAG Rajiv Mehrishi to look into the issue of waiving the interest on the COVID-induced moratorium. The committee will submit its report within 1 week. This panel will also make suggestions on how to mitigate the financial constraints of various sections of society. Let's go across to Ruchi for more details.
Finance Ministry has formed an expert panel that will be looking into the issue of waiver of interest and waiver of interest on interest with respect to the COVID-19 related moratorium. It will be headed by former CAG Rajiv Mehrishi along with the former MPC member Ravindra Dholakia as well as B. Sriram, the former MD of SBI. The panel will have 1 week's time to submit their report, of course coming in after the Apex Court increased and gave an extension to their interim order and asked banks to not tag any of their loans as non-performing assets till the 28th of September. In fact, also asked the government as well as banks to find a solution, following which the Solicitor General Tushar Mehta had said that a holistic solution was being worked upon. Now, this panel is tasked with a very important issue of what happens to the waiver of interest and waiver of interest on interest. Remember, the banks as well as RBI so far have already explained how this is not a workable solution. They cannot go ahead with this, and banks cannot be expected to subsidize the borrowers with the depositors' money. RBI has said that the interest component under moratorium is close to 2 lakh crore rupees. Macquarie in their report have said that the interest on interest component alone is close to 15 to 20,000 crore rupees, and this is going to hit the banking sector hard. So clearly this panel will be tasked with finding a middle ground, finding a middle solution as to what can be done. Remember, banking is needs commercial decision making. Given the fact that the Apex Court has now come into this issue, needs to be seen now what this expert panel will now look to do.
Okay, that was Ruchi, but we also spoke to consulting editor Maithili Busnurmat, who shared her views on the expert panel formed to assist the government's over-relief for bank borrowers. Let's listen in.
This is a commercial decision, and it is not a practice that is unique to India. This is the practice followed all over the world because banks do not lend their own money. Banks lend money which they take from depositors on which they pay interest. So there is no way they can offer any kind of concession on the interest to be paid by the borrowers to the bank without penalizing somebody. It is a very trite thing to say, but it is true that there is no free lunch. So this is a commercial decision that should have been left strictly to the banks. In fact, the Supreme Court should not have ideally not even entertained this plea from the petitioners. But now that the Supreme Court has waded into this territory and now we have an expert committee set up, maybe the government could come up with some alternative that they perhaps could give some kind of succor to the borrowers. But let's remember that this would actually be pretty unfair, because what you are doing is basically benefiting giving some support to those borrowers who are pleading and have taken the advantage of the moratorium, whereas others who have somehow managed to pay their dues are not being given the benefit. And ultimately, remember that anything that even the center gives comes at the cost of the taxpayer. The center also doesn't have any money from its own pocket. Ultimately, whatever money the center parts with is money that belongs to the taxpayer of this country, the public of this country. So this is an unfortunate consequence, as I said, of the Supreme Court intervening in an area which should have been left to the commercial judgment of the banks, should have been an executive judgment, if at all, of the government, and is not a matter for the courts to decide. It is not a matter of law. It is not a matter of interpretation of the Constitution. The two key areas that the Supreme Court really lies within the domain of the Apex Court. But unfortunately, since the Supreme Court has entertained this petition, I think this is the natural consequence of that. We'll have to follow through and see what happens on 28th. Hopefully, we will get a final decision, because this kind of impasse is neither good for the borrowers or for the bankers nor for the economy.